Good morning. My name is Sarah Keane. I work for Oitema, a partner in the FETFX Project Consortium. I would like to welcome our panelists, moderators, and audience to day one of the two-day virtual workshop, Signals from the Future, Emerging Technologies in Science Journalism. This workshop has been organized by FETFX in partnership with the Quest project, with the main aim being to shed light on future and emerging technologies, also known as FETs in short, in science journalism. FETs are fascinating to broad audiences, but can prove challenging in that while their future impacts might be massive, their precise workings and pathways to innovation can be unclear. We will start with a short presentation about FETFX from our project coordinator, Marta Calderaro. So good morning, Marta.
Good morning, everyone. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I would like also from my side to thank you for the organization of the workshop and as well for the participation of all the speakers and the participants that are attending. So I'm going to present the FETFX project, which I have the pleasure to coordinate. So I'm Marta Calderaro. I'm coming from the Italian Agency for the Promotion of European Research. And today we are hosting this workshop by the FETFX project, which is a coordination and support action dedicated to communicate and giving outreach to the Future and Emerging Technologies program. Our project has been started within January 2019 and will be finalized in mid-2021. We are actually 4 partners, APRE, which I'm representing now, Fondazione Icons, which is a communication agency, Zabala and Utima, which are 2 innovation consultancy agencies. So our objectives are to communicate about the future and emerging technologies and the evolution within the European Innovation Council, as well as engaging the communities around emerging technologies and within the European Innovation Council with a different set of stakeholders and activities. Of course, all our services are free of charge. So let me check. Okay, so you should be able to see my next slide. So actually, we are based on the experience that we gather within the FET project, where we have organized different engagement events within also the European Parliament, as well as with different workshops and within regions, as well as other different activities. And we have also reached an online engagement of 250,000 people within our social media and the website. So our approach is to co-create stories within the Future and Emerging Technologies funded projects, as well as communicating about their results, their innovation potential, but also their science-enabled research and innovation through our web media and social media, but also through our engagement events, such as the one that we are hosting today. We have, of course, a dedicated communication hub where you can find all the related information concerning emerging technologies within our website, which in a different type of channels, communicated channels, such as stories written in news release or articles written by different journalists, expert journalists, but also via video interviews and via different other channels, such as page flows and other issues. So I have mentioned, of course, the video interviews that we have. You have also a dedicated webpage to the FET-funded projects, where you can find all the relevant information filtering by the category or by the disciplines that you find of main interest for yourself, but also filtering them by their results.
Marta, can I just interrupt quickly? We can't see your PowerPoint. Are you showing a PowerPoint at the same time?
Yeah. Sorry, because probably there was an issue before. So I'm checking another time.
Yes, there it is.
Thank you. Okay, let me check. Now you should be able to see it.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So this is actually the web page where I was talking about concerning the FET projects database. But you can find also more information in our knowledge hub in terms of resources that are actually coming from the different ecosystem concerning the future and emerging technologies, as well as the European Innovation Council as well. And filtering, of course, on the basis of the target audience that you are, okay? Of course, as I was telling to you and mentioning before, since we are co-creating stories, so we need your direct involvement in our activities. We have always this open call for editorials, for FETFX editorials, which is dedicated to showcase the results that the different FET projects would like to showcase. And they are going also to be published in our bi-monthly publication, the FETFX e-magazine. We have also launched a different set of outputs, in particular this booklet, which is named Voices from the Future, which lays out the European path towards emerging technologies in the past 30 years, where you are able to find the policy evolution towards the upcoming European Innovation Council Pathfinder, but also reasonable results in terms of innovation and scientific discoveries that are hidden in those FET-funded projects. Let me check if it works. I would like also to launch our next activities, which is going to be a dedicated webinar on funding opportunities on emerging technologies with the participation of the 3 Eranet co-fund actions, Kistera, Flagship, and Quantera. The objective of the webinar is to giving information concerning the planned and open calls dedicated to the different emerging technologies supported via the Eranet co-fund actions, but also giving information about the supporting facilities that are available at national and European levels for the proposers. So the next webinar is going to be held in 2 weeks in the 19th of November. The participation is free of charge. And of course, if you want to follow us, we ask you to get registered to the webinar. Finally, I would like to present, and we have today also Eva, which is the coordinator of one of those coordination and support actions, which are supporting the future and emerging technologies in terms of different services, dedicated services to the research and innovation community. So we have the pre-FET, coordination and support action, which is dedicated to identify through an observatory the early trends, but also supporting the proposers on their project building and on their building of their idea. We have, of course, FETFX, which I have presented previously. We have the FET briefing coordination and support action, which is dedicated more on the innovation opportunities and accessing the different markets. So you are able to find different information on also on accelerating your ideas and exploiting your results in the different FET projects. And you have also the access to EAC NCP network, which is gathering all the information from the national contact points at European level, dedicated to the FET, to the accelerator, so the Pathfinder, the accelerator, and the different schemes dedicated to access to risk finance, now in Horizon 2020, but also in the next Horizon Europe. So you can find relevant information and targeted events, as well as targeted services to proposers also there. So, of course, you can follow us through our website, through our Twitter account, LinkedIn account, but you can also reach us within our email. And thank you for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you, Marta. So great. Okay, we will hear more about the work of our Quest partners in panel 2, which will be moderated by their project coordinator, Alessandra Fornetti. Good morning, Alessandra. Now, before we start, a friendly reminder to our audience to please mute your microphones and disable your cameras to reduce any background distractions. And if you have any questions, you can submit those for our panels by posting them to the chat box. Now, our first panel is entitled High Risk Research, Assessing FET Communication Attitudes and Paths to Innovation. We are quite honored to introduce the moderator, Professor Helga Nowotny. Professor Nowotny is a founding member and the former vice president and former president of the European Research Council and Professor Emeritus of Science and Technology Studies at ETH Zurich. So welcome, Professor Nowotny. Thank you for joining us, and I will hand the floor over to you now.
Thank you. Good morning and a warm welcome also from my side. As you heard, we are here to discuss some of the fundamentals, the gaps, the obstacles, constraints of trying to convey to the general public, to policymakers, to entrepreneurs, but also to wider ecosystem of RTI. What is it we are doing when we speak about FET projects, when we speak about what we are expecting, the great breakthroughs towards innovation also from EIC. Science communication is easy when it comes to presenting results that are already a finished product. Then everyone can be proud. We have new drugs that are very efficient, or we have engineering pieces that make life easier, that save costs, etc. But it becomes very difficult when we are to convey the uncertainty which is part of doing research, which is part of moving towards innovation. And this is something that research and innovation share. Both are very uncertain until you are actually there. And to convey this ongoing process to politicians, policymakers, who want results already yesterday, to policymakers and funders who always speak about high risk and high gain. But let me assure you, when it comes to actual practice, most of them are very hesitant to really put the money into high risk research because the uncertainty is there. And finally, the general public that also is eager to see results and not to be too much involved in this, one step back and sometimes 2 steps forward or vice versa. That is part of the way how research progresses and how we reach the stage of innovation. So this is our task, but this is also something that our panel is very experienced in doing. So it's my great pleasure to introduce very briefly the panel that have agreed to share this session with us. Let me start. Sorry, I have to take a sip of water. Let me start with Valeria delle. Valeria, I don't know whether we have actually met when I was visiting IIT. Yes, okay, so hello again. She is in charge of communication activities at IIT. And I heard that also IIT, apart from many other projects, also hosts now 12 FET projects. And she has vast experience also in dealing with the European Commission, ERC, with Italian entities, etc. And she's also the Italian National Press Officer for the EU Flagship project Graphene. She also writes books. Next, welcome to István Palogyai, a well-known science journalist from Hungary, who has long experience also in organizing and participating in the Second World Conference of Science Journalists, which was held in Budapest some time ago, and who has been very much involved in science and society activities done and involved by the European Commission, was also an evaluator for the Descartes Prize, etc., and is now the science editor of the largest and most serious newspaper in Hungary today. Eva Garcia Munición, if I pronounce your name correctly, is the coordinator for FET, and I will ask you particularly to explain to us what is FET. She is also the managing partner, as you heard, of RTD&I in Madrid. And last but not least, we have Iordanis Arzimanoglou with us, who is the European Innovation Council Program Manager with vast experience in biotechnology, health issues, and innovation in areas of medical genetics, cancer research, etc., including experience that took you to the US and to other European countries. So a very experienced panel. And since we do not have infinite time for our discussion, I would suggest to you that we have several rounds of discussion. So rather than, having 10 minutes of presenting everything you want to say, I would suggest let's do 2 or 3 rounds. You are rather brief in the beginning, and then we see the dynamics that develops between us, because as you know, as communicator, it's much more interesting to our audience if they see us engaged instead of just having a talking head. So I would like to start with Iordanis, if I may. And Iordanis, I was wondering whether you could briefly explain to our audience. People know about FET, the Future Emerging Technology program that has been around for some time. And now we have the European Innovation Council. We have it still on a pilot phase because Horizon Europe has not started as yet. But this has, of course, caused a lot of questions and discussion in the community. What does it actually mean for FET? What is a Pathfinder compared to a FET project, etc.? So I think it would be nice if you could give us a brief introduction on that. And then I have a personal question to you. I was wondering, when I saw your title as Program Manager, and I somehow felt, is this not somewhat outdated? Going back to the way how the Commission was thinking, decades ago, I would say, when you had programs set, more or less everything was set, and you had a manager. While if we move into the territory of innovation, we need a different spirit, we know that. And an entrepreneurial spirit, if you look at what happens in industry, means also that this has to be mirrored in, the identity of the people who are in leading positions. And so I was wondering whether it would not be better to call you, at least if I may call you, Chief Innovation Officer. So these are my 2 questions.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to thank Sarah Keane and her organization for the invitation. It's appreciated. And I'm impressed with how, I shouldn't forget to say, Marta Calderaldo and FETX are so active, really. That's really impressive in the scientific journalism. I have to be honest, I was only aware of science business before I arrived here, but I'm impressed with what you have been doing. And also, I'd like to thank you for your questions. First of all, with one word, I would say Pathfinder is the evolution of FET, based on FET. But it's not only FET, is a lot of more things than FET. And that is what creates some anxiety. Answering quickly your second question, which is so much to the point, you can't imagine. Really, since the day I arrived, I talked about the title. The titles are not only old-fashioned, are misleading. Our titles actually for the industry would understand as a junior level, though the positions are very senior level. So it's not the appropriate title. And all this is because, you know, of what kind of advice you get, of what kind of information you have, of what you achieve, and who are the people behind. And sometimes these confusions are created. The title does not correspond with the mission and the mandate that we have, which is quite demanding, quite challenging, and really something to look forward for, hopefully with an impact at the European level. So you're right, the title is totally inappropriate. Chief Innovation Officer would be an appropriate title. I fully agree with you. And especially if you make it into sectors, big sectors, broad sectors, like life sciences, or then it will be even more appropriate, because one understands that you are responsible for a lot of actions that will take place at European level in this sector on behalf of the European Innovation Council. So you were on the point, to the point, as we say. Now, if I can take one more minute to discuss about Pathfinder, and as you said, we're in the pilot phase, which means we are experimenting. Huh? Don't forget that. If I had to say something about myself, I'd say that I'm still 60-70% scientist, still scientist, senior scientist, and the rest is management. And so we are experimenting, and this is literally speaking. Things are tried. We looked at US models. You probably have heard that, for instance, the European BARTA, speaking for my field, is about to be launched. I mean, it has been announced, meaning there are things that you can learn from the US experience, but there are things that needs to be adapted to the European environment and the European reality. That's very important. And there is where it might be a little bit difficult and challenging how you adapt and how you move forward. One aspect that I'd like also to bring to the discussion, which is extremely important to me and creates lots of problems, is the scattered activities that have happened throughout the last years, throughout the last decades, I would say, from the European level in the innovation, with different organizations, different agencies, different goals and all that. So before you get into innovation, you have to really take care of all the uncoordinated action. Although you don't aim at that, it comes, I mean, you will be confronted with that. So it's unavoidable. And from the first days, my colleagues and I will bring this to the surface and said, you know, before we take any activities, before we do something about innovation, we need to know who is involved, who are the stakeholders, what are the different interests, why do we have calls in the same sector from 8 different agencies or directories, or why do we have these huge overlaps? So it's just to take care, you know, of all the calls and all the activity that is necessary to start thinking about the strategy, how you develop the actions around EIC. I have to tell you that EIC is really has high expectations, and we are aiming high, really high. I'll stop here, and for you to please go ahead, ask whatever you want.
Well, thank you. I just want to follow up, since we are also speaking about communication here. And one of the challenges will certainly be how you communicate to the general public, to policymakers, to entrepreneurs, to the many stakeholders, what is actually happening. So do you see your task as being a much easier task, instead of having all these many projects that are uncoordinated, as you said, if you have, you know, some kind of convergence, or what are the difficulties that you foresee? So what is the easy part that you foresee compared to this uncoordinated, scattered landscape? Yeah. And what are the difficulties and obstacles, and strategies always about obstacles as well that you may encounter?
Thank you for the question. We have to, the best way to communicate things is through impact, through action. But we still, until we get there, we need, of course, to communicate our strategy plans. Because it's a pilot phase, I'm sorry repeating that, it means that even the strategy is something that we're, you know, constantly revising and rethinking whether we are heading to what we want to achieve. And this is not something easy. Now, the European Innovation Council is an organization that it has, I wouldn't say there is any corresponding immediately organization in the US, and that says something. Huh? So you have the overview and you want to be the leading organization in Europe, but you need to translate that to the public. You need to translate that first to the stakeholders. So not to be, not to feel uncertain, not to feel that they're going to lose something, or not to feel that the role of the EIC is something now that is going to take power out of them. It's also the human level, and which is very, very important. On the other hand, through the EIC, you really have the ability to reach out to many different, from hubs, innovation hubs, to parks, to consortia, to all these stakeholders of research and innovation. Another thing that is important for us is that we focus on, people call it deep tech, I would call it research intensive innovation, because there is what is called in the old times high tech and low tech innovation. Sometimes you make more money for the investors from the low tech innovation, but we are committed more to the science driven innovation. So that means that you understand science, and I'd like to share with you from my US experience, people were very much skeptical about, had concerns, how do we develop things, and if we don't know regulation, if we don't know the market, being a scientist or being a researcher, how could I reach the market? The reality is that over the years, you understand that all what you need for the high-tech innovation is good science. The only thing that cannot be corrected is if you have poor science. So for me, that is a big challenge. And for that is the inappropriate title of the program management corresponds to 3, 4, 5 people that we come with a lot of scientific background exactly for that purpose, to convince, first of all, people that they have gotten FET, people that have gotten other now ERC. We are working close with ERC, and I would consider as valuable a close relationship between EIC and ERC. Really, really valuable. I don't want to take more time on that, but we're working on that. Because I'm repeating, if you have poor science, there is no expert in the world. There is nobody. There is no company or corporation that can correct that. All the rest along the way, you can fit the people, you make the people to help you improve them. Another quick thing would be that working closely with EIC, you can bring together corporations, R&D, research intensive R&D with leading research, with consortia. And because you have the European overview, you can find synergies that are unexploited and unexplored by the different stakeholders, because they look at of course, at their own research. So they can see probably what is next to them, but they can't see the whole picture. We can see the picture in its entirety. And there where you can make interventions. That is very important. We're just starting realizing that.
Okay, thank you. As you mentioned, translation to the stakeholders is always difficult. If it's a consolation, when we started the ERC, I tell you, we had lots of reservations and many doubts. How can anyone at EU level do it better than Germany or the
exactly.
UK?
Exactly.
So if it's a point of consolation, take it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. So
now I would like to move to Eva and ask you to tell us a little bit what is meant by this pre-FET. What do these projects do, and where does communication come in?
Okay, thank you very much, Helga. Thank you very much, FETFX project, for inviting me to this webinar. Somehow I think pre-FET is a kind of intersection between the 3 subtopics in this panel, which are communication of future and emerging technologies, challenges in relation along the innovation path, and the importance of Pathfinder now and future and emerging technologies in general. I think it is an intersection where what we have been doing is do a very evidence-based and intensive technology scouting exercise, which was evidence-based. This was important, which was intensive, very intensive, and also which was open, because in this exercise, We use human experts, we use artificial intelligence, and then we open the results to a whole and wide consultation process. Then we came out this way, we came out with certain trends that we have been communicating in the last months, and we are still working in this, and this is challenging because we are talking about future and emerging technologies trends with the uncertainties, with the risks and fears they create, also with the dreams we can build around them. And this is what we have been working into, and we will be working in the coming 2 months because we are wrapping up all the results into what we call a role mapping exercise. We don't call it a roadmap because it's not genuine, a proper, let's say, roadmap, but that's some type of role mapping exercise that so we can deliver all the outcomes and conclusions and keep communicating, because this is one conclusion. You need to communicate continuously. You don't overcome the challenges by communicating once. And also this way we also prepare it somehow towards helping these barriers along the innovation path. We try to engage the people because it's the people who needs to go along this path, the different stakeholders. We also build on these risks and dreams that can leverage some barriers within the markets and towards regulation. So this is also part of the intersection. And then we were active in trying to make some flowers flourish in this arena by helping different researchers that didn't know each other and that were coming from different disciplines to try to brainstorm project ideas within these trends that could be pursued in the future, and also involve other stakeholders. We did a game jam to have game developers dreaming around these project ideas, hand in hand with the researchers, architects, and other part of the creativity stakeholders. So this unique intersection that has ended right now because we had our final event last week. And we are now wrapping up everything so we can deliver and hopefully will create most impact.
So maybe this is also a time for stock taking. I mean, it's impressive how much you have done in terms of activities, trying to bring different stakeholders together. But what were some of the difficulties? I mean, we know Europe is, and this is the strength of Europe, in my opinion, very diverse. And even if researchers are researchers a bit everywhere, nevertheless, the national research systems still have an important way of shaping what actually happens. The relationship between universities and industry varies from country to country, from research system to research system. So what are some of the maybe lessons that you would draw from your impressive activity over all these years? First, with regard to, how can you turn what may become a disadvantage into an advantage, namely to make this diversity thrive? This would be my first question. My second question would be, what is it you could, leave to people who will continue in one form of another, because we still need networks, we need to bring people together that have different ideas at different stages of their project. What would you say is important to make people come together, to form a kind of community, even if it is a temporarily limited community, but nevertheless to begin to share a vision, to begin to share how you define a challenge or a problem together? Because without this sharing, you are back into a silo mentality. This would be my question, my second question to you.
Thank you very much. I would say diversity is challenging but it's always a strength, in my opinion, and in the experience we gather through pre-FET. It is challenges in the sense that, and you mentioned before, the different stakeholders and the different disciplines somehow speak different languages, and this has to be translated. But and also they create different imaginations. They imagine different visions around the same trends and the same projects. And also there is the challenge of credibility, or let's say skepticism. The more disruptive you are, the more skepticism you have around yourself. But this is something we can manage. It's just a matter of, and this brings me to a second part of your question, to methodology. This is something that we conclude from pre-FET. It is, let's say, wise to use sounding methodologies and let's say complete and very well thought of methodologies to manage the challenges, so that we bring to the most the strengths that we have from diversity, because it is a strength. We just have to manage carefully to make the most out of it. And I think in pre-FET we developed, we designed some methodologies. We run them once, for sure there are opportunities for improvement, but there are also many opportunities to leverage from the results and use methodologies, use tools to do things, not improvise and just do things, do them in a methodological and systematic way. And the last part, in terms of community, I think, and this is also, this also can be managed methodologically, is I think one of the main let's say, things that happened during pre-FET is that we were listening. And by listening, I mean that we were actively listening. We were making lots of questions first. This is part of listening. And second, we were really using the answers, making results on top of these answers. This is listening, making questions and using the answers. When people feel listened to, they engage much more heavier in all the activities.
Thank you. Can you just give us one example for what you call a methodology, you know, to give us something that we can become a bit more concrete,
Sure.
And, you know, then we have a better understanding of how this can also be transmitted to others, because I think this is also part of what you wanted to tell us. We have something that we tried it out, it worked, and we would like to share it with others so that they can also use it. Can you give us an example?
Sure. There is one main example that is the methodology we use for technology scouting. We are starting, and we have some papers written about this methodology. I can share it through the chat. We started by detecting signals, what we were calling signals. So we had hundreds of information sources that were scanned manually by people to detect signals, and we wanted it to be people. First, because we were using some sources like videos and so forth that technology cannot process that easily. And second, because we wanted to keep the creativity and, let's say, the imagination power from human intelligence. And then once we had these signals, also hundreds of signals, we were processing them through desktop research and also supported by artificial intelligence, visual analytics and big data, so we could process, integrate these signals, inform them into trends, and we came out with a list of 45 what we were calling pre-validated trends. And this we opened to the community through an open consultation involving thousands of researchers. We did certain of surveys with different stakeholders, so researchers we were consulting online, different stakeholders, we were surveying them, and this was also part of the methodology, because to other stakeholders we needed to explain them personally the trends before we could get their answers, and this is why it was interviews, vis-a-vis interviews rather than open consultation as with researchers. And then we organized certain events where we could stay one full day working hand in hand with our hands in the trends, asking lots of questions, going back and forth around them. And this way we came up with a list of top 20 trends. And this is part of the methodology. And then in parallel, we were also analyzing the RRI perspective, the responsible research and innovation perspective, with an indicator that we designed that is called the RRI intensity level, the RIL. And we were somehow measuring the RIL of each of the 45 pre-validated trends. So this is one methodology. And then another methodology is what we were doing for trying to motivate the generation of project ideas within the top 20 trends. Once we had the top 20 trends, we consider them somehow playground arenas for researchers to think of potential project ideas. So we were running a series of creativity workshops online with one platform that allowed us to brainstorm together in real time, and this also worked very well. We are writing a paper about this right now.
So we look forward, and please distribute your findings, your thing. What I find interesting also about what you said is, I recently participated in an annual meeting here in Vienna, the Peter Drucker Forum. Peter Drucker, as you know, was one of the great management gurus. And what was interesting listening to these CEOs and managers from all over the world was the importance of moving away from we have the answers to we need good, powerful questions. And if this comes from the world of the corporate world, you know, world of industry, I think this is also an important signal. You know, not just we have the answers, but, you know, we need to engage in new questions. So this brings me to Valeria delle. And as I said when I introduced you, you have a lot of experience with FET projects, with other projects. And you have thought a lot also about, you know, the community aspect, because you have to bring together different stakeholders. It's done in a different way from what Eva was speaking about, because IIT has a different mission and you're working with it in a different way. But so I would be interested in listening to your experience in how do you create communities also. And how do you link what happens in a project to the wider outside world? What is the role of the researchers? You know, by now every researcher knows we also have to communicate, we have to do outreach, but at the same time, we know not everyone is gifted. So how do you organize this within IIT or in your experience in a way where you can say, you know, we have tried different things and this is what works? Valeria.
Yes, thank you, Professor Nowotny.
Just call me Helga, please.
It's an honor. Thank you very much. I would like to share a few slides just to make some example and make the audience much clearer what I want to say. So I hope you will.
Yes, we see something.
Okay.
We see dendrites.
I'm sorry, but okay. So very quickly, as you told already, in IIT we got a lot of European projects.
Please keep distance to your microphone because
Yep.
you're.
Yeah, sorry. So we have a lot of European Research Council grants, but a lot also of FET projects. 6 are running and 7 should be launched in the next year. We're also part of the FET Graphene Flagship. I am together with Maddalena Scandola. Can you hear me? No, sorry.
Valeria, your voice keeps coming and going, so keep the same distance.
Try with this way. Maybe
Yes.
it's better.
This is much better.
Hi,
Okay.
Valeria, yes, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. As you already told, we have a lot of European funded projects. We run it. 6 FET are running, and 7 should be launched in 2021. What is important for me to say is that as IIT, we have dedicated activities to projects. We have a project office which supports research groups to implement the project, to prepare proposal, and then assist them during the whole project life cycle. Some years ago, we decided to have a communication unit for supporting researchers. So our first stakeholders were researchers, to convince them that communication in projects that should be very, very important. So we start with them to decide what kind of activity they will be comfortable to do during the project, and then propose, and then we work together during the duration of the project. What I learned in this period is that there are some features that are strictly correlated to the FET project that could be translated in communication elements. Of course, the visionary thinking, you all have said that FET is something breakthrough. So in communication, this means having a storytelling about the future. Then we have a very strong interdisciplinary approach. Different teams are working together. And what we try to do in our projects is to shape a common identity around the project. So bring all the groups that are involved in the project to feel one thing with the project. Of course, we have the identity, the graphic identity that may help, but we also try to make some events, maybe online events, where all partners can interact one with each other in order to promote the project. Of course, many of these projects bring to new technologies. So in communication, this means that we have to speak about the impact, how we can use this technologies in society. Many of them are inspired by nature, and this gives us also the possibility to speak of sustainability, the impact for the environment. We have a lot of researchers that are really, really committed in communication, and the fact they are in the front line give us also the opportunity to have role models, in particular women scientists. We have some women that are really acting like role models, showing the younger generation that making science is really possible. And of course, the fact that Europe give grants to us permit to communicate that innovation, technology is actually an European value, and it is part of our culture. So this is what I have learned, and together with my researchers during our communication activities. I have here some example. On the Wall Street Journal, we got a coverage for the researcher, one of our women scientists, Barbara Mazzolai. And it is clear here that in American newspaper cover, because it's an European initiative, at the same time, there is this quest for a new way of producing energy. And it's really a visionary project because we got energy from plants and their leaves. On El País, we have another history, but it's always related to the fact the new...
May I ask you to be a bit shorter?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Otherwise we run out of time, and no time is here to speak.
Yeah, so this is the first picture that you see, and this is really important also. What we are communicating with FET project is also new images in the public imaginary of science. I think this is really important to take into account because we are shaping our culture, our scientific culture. But what are the boundaries? I think that Helga Nowotny already underlined it. The fact that we are in a process, and this process has uncertainties, not only surprises, because the knowledge can bring, scientific knowledge can bring surprises. So there is a sort of tension between the visionary thinking that is something long-term with risk to take into account, and the necessity of an impact in very short term on society. So the first question that I want to do also to our colleague from the journalism is if we do not have the risk of overpromising by communicating such kind of a project. And maybe we should focus more on the fact that the impact of our research should be not on short term, even if it's really important to invest in basic research to have innovation. And we should maybe focus about the process of innovation, also considering the failures. So the failures are part of the process of innovation. Journalists often ask about, please share me image of what you did. So what you did, actually, this is the news. But in the short term, maybe this kind of results are not the same that we have promised at the beginning of the project. So this is some consideration I wanted to do with you. So we have journalists that are our stakeholders as well, and scientists that we try to involve in the community.
Thank you very much, Valeria. I think one important message, take-home message, is that you have dissolved the tension between, visionary, uncertain, long-term view of the future that is part of research. On the other hand, the impatience of, politicians, but also parts of the public, etc., show us the impact now. By saying maybe we should think also about more long-term impacts and work on that. And the second takeaway message for me, at least, was that you showed us the importance of images, new images. We live in a time and in a culture where we are flooded by so many images, and science, in order to be present in society and to also, take the dynamics of science that keeps on changing all the time, you need also this vision. So thank you very, very much. And now, last but not least, I turn to Istvan. Sorry, Istvan, you had to wait so long.
No problem. Yeah.
We get involved in these discussions. Now, you were listening to everything that we were discussing, but you also have a long-term experience with, the problems also that the Commission faces in, supporting science journalists. Of course, the Commission wants the European societies and European public to know about, to appreciate, to take what is funded from the EU. So I would be interested if you share with us some of your insights that you have gained, both in this respect, but perhaps also your reactions to some of what we have been discussing.
Thank you, Professor Nowotny. First of all, may I correct some of your introduction at my side, because unfortunately, thanks to our government and Henry Petsina, our paper was closed in 2016, as you may heard. Before we met once or twice, as you may not remember, but unfortunately, I am already a freelancer. Never mind. So
one has to think that miracles can happen.
Yes. Okay. I think there are really very interesting topics, but first of all, I have to stress that we are living in a very special world about communication science. In addition to COVID, interest in other scientific news is now really declining, fortunately, unless it is somehow related to the epidemic. For example, the artificial intelligence, which is really one of the main FET research topics, has received a special attention in controlling the spread of the virus, for example. And among other high-risk FET and Pathfinder researchers, for example, now, which has a very quite good attention as space research, astrophysics, and the new energy projects in European content, the ITER, the fusion research, and the carbon captures. For example, what can we do with captured CO2? That's also very interesting. But mainly, what you mentioned earlier, the concrete results, and not to the road to it, and not the conditions of the research. This is unfortunately the nature of the media. I tried many times to shed light to the other side of the scientific world, but they were not so acceptable simply by the editors. But what approaches are the most successful nowadays? In my point of view, first of all, the interview with scientists. These are always very, very interesting, and not only quote from them, but to show the persons behind the scene. And eye-catching and spectacular video materials, as you mentioned, the picture is essentially important now in every kind of communication, but in science communication very much. And for example, there is a very new era of blogs, video blogging, and that is, I will tell you later about that, but this is very important. But still, the very conservative, so-called the storytelling, that remains a very deeply important thing, a good storytelling, including as many sources as possible. That is very important. And what may be the obstacles and constraints to the processing of such topics? That could be also some things which I would like to outline. The European project still has a lot of bureaucratic obstacles. Retention of information, mostly at industrial resources, even in European level. And researchers need too much permission, for example, to make a statement in many countries. Finding the necessary simplification according to the level of understanding of the recipients on complex topics, that is always could be hard for science journalists, especially for the beginners. And he was asking me about the challenges. Now, I have to say again, the COVID uncertainty completely changed the science communication opportunities and obstacles. On the one hand, it has amplified the possibilities. Far more people pay attention to scientific opinions and news than before. But with a protracted epidemic, social fatigue, and impatience, anti-scientific voices have intensified, and they are much more challenging because they are given a political backlash from the nationalists and populist politicians, not only in the US, but in many European countries as well. So that is a very important thing, even for the FET projects. About general challenges, I would emphasize there is a very different difference between accuracy and precision. A layperson, so the general public, doesn't need the same level of precision as a scientist or a reviewer. The general public needs to understand the big picture. So I think that's the trick, to hit the level of precision that's meaningful to the public without sacrificing the accuracy. So the other question which was asking from me, how the European Commission could support science journalism. But in order to talk about support, we need to talk about the state of science journalism, which is very, very crucial. The number of specialized science journalists is declining everywhere globally, especially in smaller countries and more intense in less frequented printing press and at the radio and TV broadcasting. On the other hand, the science appearance is growing on online portals, also with less specialized journalists. So that means that in every online portal, maybe you can see above science, but the people who are dealing with this, they are mostly not really specialized science journalists. And we can see less multifaceted approach, unfortunately. In addition, there are more and more video blogs, podcasts, and they are sometimes made by lay people, but maybe also, thanks God, also by researchers, which are sometimes very good. However, to know a more accurate picture, it would be important to make an accurate survey, at least in the EU, about the state of science journalism. That is a missing thing in my point of view. At the same time, the number of people working in the PR increases. Lots of former science journalists got job at PR departments. And consequently, the materials of PR departments of research institutions, universities, etc., are better in quality, but the danger is the lack of an independent critical approach, which is the nature of the real journalism. So also they reach consumers directly, these PR materials, without the general press, the general media. So I see sources of science journalists are narrower and shrink to a fewer major scientific journals and the largest research institutes of some countries with the largest scientific outlets. And the smaller and less famous, smaller countries and less famous journals are left out. Also, there may be some interesting scientific results here as well, also in Austria or Hungary. And the last, my last remarks are, what are the opportunities of the European Commission support? I could be direct, I could see a direct support with help access to source of information. There is a good model, for example, the European Science Media Hub by the European Parliament. There was a lot of trial, a lot of approaches to establish the European Science Media Center. There was a suggestion, but language barriers made it difficult to realize. Also, in the UK and in some Scandinavian countries, there are good models for such a science media center, which makes together the scientists and the journalists. To give grants for small emerging science communication oriented outlets, especially online, there could be also another opportunity. To establish a support mechanism for science journalism training, mostly in university level, that would be also good. And finally, to establish the European Award for Science Communication or Science Journalism. As you mentioned, I was a jury member in the beginning of the 2000 years for the Descartes Prize. And there was a very good Descartes Prize for science communication. And it could be also indirect support through professional organizations of science journalists, like European Union of Science Journalists Associations, where I was at the time president, or the national professional science journalists associations. And through online training courses and study trips, they would be also possible for an indirect support. And finally, to reduce the bureaucratic difficulties in accessing information in European institutions, that would be also an indirect support.
Thank you very much for this very good and profound analysis of where we are with regard to science communication in general, and in particular as far as the profession of science journalist is concerned. I think, you know, when listening to you, I was very much struck by the fact what can be done. You know, we are in a crucial phase in general, where we see also our democracies, liberal democracies, are, you know, swamped with fake news. We are swamped with information that no one is controlling whether it's false or not and the impact it has. So science communication is part of this larger picture and has to be aware that there are these trends. So in a sense, you know, I wish that you would write it up and also, for instance, share it when all these big European professional associations meet, because they all are concerned, how do we, as molecular biologists, as plant physiologists, as, I don't know, material scientists, they all have their professional meetings. They're all concerned, how can we communicate with the public? So I think it's important, you know, to tell them that you can do something. And as you rightly said, and I fully agree, it's important to involve the scientists, not with a sort of PR mentality, which will go nowhere, because communication is credible when it's authentic. And if a scientist speaks about his or her authentic experience, it includes failures, just as entrepreneurs who are willing to speak about failures have a much larger impact than those who just say, you know, I've done everything all right and I am the exemplar of a successful entrepreneur, because there's always another story behind it.
That is very important, and I want to say I hold many seminars for scientists how to communicate with journalists. That is also a very good model. And another remark, we have to know that unfortunately the general public got their scientific knowledge through the media, unfortunately not through science journalists, but through general journalists. And that is also a point what we have to know.
I'm afraid we are running out of time. We're only the beginning of one day. So I hope that in other panels, some of you know, wonderful and rich experience that you have brought to this panel will be listened to, will be taken up, will be shared. So all I can say is, from my heart, thank you for this very intense and good participation. Keep up the good work, and I wish every one of you much success in the future. And we need to stay together to do something for Europe. And it is such great work that is being done, but it needs to be communicated and built upon. And especially if we look at, you know, what is happening, the US elections on the one hand, on the tech front, you know, we are speaking about technological sovereignty, Europe being caught between US and China. You know, we need Europe and we need to get on with it. And communication is a very, very important part of it. So thank you very much. And I hand back with my apologies for overstepping the time to our host.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nowotny, and thank you to Istvan, Valeria, Iordanis, and Eva. That was a great panel. Panel 2, which is on the topic of new tools for communicating, new approaches and mechanisms for communicating about future and emerging technologies, will start at 11:15. So we have 7 minutes in case everyone would like to take a short break and grab a coffee, and that will be hosted by Quest. So we will see you back here shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.